Good morning, Adam Uglum here, hosting the Community Voice program today. And honestly, I was planning on starting the show off a little differently until I opened up the Drudge Report and saw a couple of headlines. One from the New York Times and another from Reuters. There is pain in the gas pump, is the headline. Or it says pain in the pump at least. And we all know that there is pain at the gas pump, with gas nearing $4 per gallon, and it is $4 per gallon in many states around the country. But it hasn't done very well for the president, and as high gas prices never do well for a sitting president. Right now, according to the New York Times CBS poll, which way do you think these polls usually lean, given by the pollsters New York Times and CBS, his approval rating has gone from 44 down to 41. According to the New York Times CBS poll. And the other headline that really bothers me on the Drudge Report, this one is an article from a local news station, I believe. And apparently Obama doesn't have an answer to how much Americans should pay for gas. That is probably the most infuriating part. Not so much that gas is expensive, but that the leader of the free world can't tell the country what he thinks gas prices should be. Does he know what gas prices are? I doubt he fills up the vehicle that he travels in, and he probably won't for the rest of his life. But that is infuriating to me, to think that the president doesn't have a clear answer for what he thinks the gas price should be. You have a presidential hopeful, Newt Gingrich, running around the country saying $2.50 a gallon of gas. The cheapest gas in the country is probably around $2.30 or $2.40. Reducing the price of gasoline $1 is not unrealistic. Chief Presidential Dog Washer Jay Carney was saying, I believe just yesterday, that there's no such plan out there to reduce gasoline to $2.50 a gallon. Well, Newt Gingrich's plan, whether you believe it or not, but there is a plan. Whether it works or not is still up for debate. There is a plan, so he's wrong from the get-go there. I don't know if Newt Gingrich's plan will work, but it's hard to believe that we can't get gasoline prices down to $2.50 a gallon, especially when you look at the president's record when it comes to energy policy. We'll get into that later. But what this leads me into is what I originally wanted to start the program in talking about, is the idea of affordability. I read to you numbers all the time about wasteful, absurd government spending. The federal government gave a $10 million affordability prize to a giant corporation for manufacturing a $50 light bulb. This from the Washington Post. The U.S. government last year announced a $10 million award for any manufacturer that could create a green but affordable light bulb. Energy Secretary Stephen Chu said the prize would spur industry to offer the costly bulbs at prices affordable for American families. And now the winning bulb is on the market. The price? $50. Retailers said the bulb made by Philips is likely to be too pricey to have broad appeal. Similar LED bulbs are less than half the cost. You've got to be kidding me. One, who on earth gives a $10 million affordability prize to any corporation who produces a $50 light bulb? Second, who are the retailers that say it's likely to be too pricey to have broad appeal? It's guaranteed to be too pricey to have broad appeal. It's a $50 light bulb. Who writes these? Then, not to mention, another thing that the word affordability brings to mind is that this is the same government that refers to Obamacare, which will cost more than $6 trillion. They can call that program the Affordable Care Act. And it reminds me of a very famous line from one of my most favorite movies, The Princess Bride.
Inconceivable! 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 Inconceivable!
You keep using that word. I don't think it means what you think it means.
You keep using that word, affordability. I don't think it means what you think it means. A $50 light bulb is the reason a corporation got $10 million of your tax money for making an affordable green light bulb. You cannot make this stuff up. It cannot be done. Briefly, we're going to talk about Obamacare. While attention has been paid, Treasury Secretary Tim Geithner's admission last week that the Obama administration doesn't have a long-term plan to address the deficit, he also provided an interesting insight into the administration's beliefs regarding the effect of Obamacare on the deficit. When asked why under his budget the deficits skyrocketed after the 10-year budget window, Treasury Secretary Tim Geithner says, "Let's ask ourselves why they take off again. Why do they do that?" Congressman Paul Ryan says because we have 10,000 people retiring every day and healthcare costs are going up. Geithner responds, "That's right, we have millions of Americans retiring every day. That will drive substantial growth rates for healthcare costs. We're not coming before you to say we have a definitive solution to our long-term problem." Quote. I want to play this clip for you.
Do you think this budget averts the deterioration of our fiscal problem?
Well, as I said, we're not claiming this solves all the problems facing the country, but it does meet the critical, essential test,
which is
of restoring our deficits to a more sustainable position for the next 10 years. And the test there, which is a test you embrace in your plan too, is to make sure you get deficits down below 3% of GDP and hold them there. And if you do that, then what happens is our overall debt burden as a share of the economy stops growing at a level we can manage and starts to come down. So we meet that test, and we help lower the trajectory of cost growth in the outer decades that comes from millions of Americans retiring, but we still would face, even with this framework, more work to do on that long-term demographic challenge.
Well, bring up slide 13, because I just don't see the rhetoric matching the results. And I'm looking out of your budget, page 58 in Analytical Perspectives. You say that this is your budget, says that the government position gradually deteriorates, that our fiscal condition deteriorates. These are your numbers.
What it shows, Mr. Chairman, is
your deficit path.
It's a good chart.
Your debt path.
And it shows just exactly what I said, which is if you look at 2012 for the next 10 years, it stabilizes that debt burden as a share of the economy.
So
and then what happens is, and it's exactly what I said.
And so we'll just allow it to take off after that?
No, and then you're right. And as millions of Americans more retire, then those costs in Medicare and Medicaid start to increase again. And that's why we're saying openly and directly to you that we're going to have some work to do. Now,
well,
what you
that's
do,
one way of putting it.
No, but what you do is, I think on your budget, although I know you're going to have a new one coming, is you would lower that path in ways that would substantially increase the burden of healthcare costs on middle-income seniors. And although we agree with you, we're going to have more work to do, but we're not going to adopt an approach that would undermine that basic benefit.
Go ahead and show slide 8, if you can. So you brought it up. I know you didn't necessarily want to see this chart. The red is the status quo. That's the baseline we're on. The green.
You could have taken it out to 3,000 or to 4,000.
This is last year's budget. Yeah, right. We cut it off at the end of the century because, the economy, according to CBO, shuts down in 2027 on this path.
But I'm glad you. I like that chart. I saw this chart yesterday. But if you look at you're talking about I think more than half a century going out. But if you look at the gap between us,
I understand the gap
between 10 and 20. It's a pretty small gap. And that gap, though, that 10 to 20 gap, which is all we're debating today, is a gap where you're achieving that slightly diminished
path. Here's the point, if you can let me, because this is your time, so it'll just take a long time.
Okay.
Here's the point. Leaders are supposed to fix problems. We have a $99.4 trillion unfunded liability. Our government is making promises to Americans that it has no way of accounting for them. And so you're saying, yeah, we're stabilizing it, but we're not fixing it in the long run. That means we're just going to keep lying to people. We're going to keep all these empty promises going. And so what we're saying is, in order to avert a debt crisis, I mean, you're the Treasury Secretary of all. If we can't make good on our bonds in the future, who's going to invest in our country? We do not want to have a debt crisis. And so it comes down to confidence and trajectory. Do we have confidence that we're getting our fiscal situation under control, that we're preventing the debt from getting at these catastrophic levels? And if you go back to the preceding chart, number 13.
Okay, that's enough of that. So there's a very short list of congressmen whom I do like, and Representative Paul Ryan from Wisconsin is on that list. And I assume he's on many of yours. If you do know who he is, if you don't, he probably is now. And if what Tim Geithner is saying isn't at least a little scary, you should probably ask your doctor if your prescription of Xanax is a little too much for you. Back after the break. Good morning. It's 8:43. We're back from the break here on News Talk 1330. You're listening to the voice of Adam Uglum here with a little political insight on your Tuesday. It is March 13th. And I'm really not sure how to explain how I feel about the way things work in Washington. Because it's all a numbers game and everybody's wrong. Both on the left and the right. I think the president has been all out in his assertion that we need to tax the rich to bring in more revenue so that we can get this pesky deficit under control. He doesn't mention that he accelerated the level of deficit spending so that we are now careening off of a fiscal cliff. His logic and thought process for justifying higher taxes and those higher taxes equaling higher revenues are very much off base if you look at the reality of higher taxes in history. Much is being made of his new proposal to lower corporate tax rates. Like a lot of things, the headline sure sounds good, but the details leave a lot to be desired, which is pretty common coming out of the Beltway. This is a president that hates private industry and believes solely in big government solutions to fix problems. Remember, he destroyed the bankruptcy process with car companies, and we're currently left with the government owning 26% of General Motors. It's a loser, just like his new plan. Instead of a blanket lowering of the rate on all corporations, Obama wants to pick winners and losers and offer incentives for things like green energy. He eliminates loopholes for his least favorite kinds of companies and opens or extends them for his favorite kinds of companies. There's a big difference in doing this and actually lowering the tax rate for everyone and having what I would consider a just law where everyone pays the same. Not where Jimmy pays one rate and Johnny pays another because Jimmy is more capable or less deserving of your sympathy. Is this the kind of world we want to live in where the president or the administration or Congress even decides who wins and who loses when it comes to the tax code? The corporate tax proposal is a campaign document. It's something that will never happen, but it gives Obama a good soundbite for those who don't pay attention. So to come full circle to what I mentioned earlier, why don't higher taxes equal higher revenue? Now, I made a B in calculus. It was a very tough B to earn. But if you think of tax revenue as a curve, as we often do in calculus, here's this notion of a parabola. And this is what economics uses. It's always a curve. There's never a straight line like the Congressional Budget Office likes to produce. That if we do this, it'll be a straight projection off into the future. But the Congressional Budget Office, as I've mentioned dozens of times on this program, is designed to be wrong. It's designed to make Keynesianism look good, both for the left and the right. The lower you make the tax rate, the lower amount of revenue you generate. And that is how accountants look at taxes. And that's why government numbers are always wrong no matter which party is quoting them. You can ask the tax division of the Congressional Budget Office, look, if I raise taxes 100% on all income tax brackets, how much will I increase the revenue? And they'll reply to you, well, you'll triple the revenue to the IRS, which is absolutely absurd. There is no economist in the world who would ascribe to that notion. It is beyond ridiculous. But these are the numbers you always get, and they're always wrong, no matter which party is quoting them. Even the Republican numbers designed to poke holes in the Obama budget. It's very easy to see usage of accounting numbers to make their point when it's convenient. In reality, people's behavior changes significantly when it comes to tax rates. Anybody who makes an investment, if capital gains taxes change, they consider some other form of investment. They may consider a municipality, for example, that may be offering 6 or 7% earnings on bondage. Or bonding, I suppose, would be the correct term. At the margin is what you need to focus on and get familiar with, because economics is all about the margins. With the incentive to increase production and income, if tax rates decrease on the next dollar made, of course they do. More production then leads to higher amounts of revenue generated, even at lower rates. Of course, there's a limit to how low the rate can go before that curve starts to turn the other way. And we discovered this with the Reagan administration. And I know people are going to rail against me for quoting Reaganomics, but the facts are the facts. Revenue between 1980 and 1988 doubled to the federal government when we reduced the top income tax rate to 28%. We reduced taxes on the rich, the tax rates, but they paid more. Why is that? That's so weird. Why would they want to pay more taxes? It's because they did. They didn't have loopholes to jump through anymore. They paid more taxes, but they weren't worried about all of their income going away either. So they were less afraid. There is a political risk when you look at tax rates. One of the very first tests of the Laffer curve, after it was originally brought up, I believe, in the Ford administration. Don't quote me on that. Calling off memory there. The first test was the Reagan era. In 1982, with the tax cut that Reagan proposed, he eliminated deductions and lowered the top rate to 28%. And what happened? Economic production took off and government revenue increased. The second test was the Bush tax cuts. What happened? Tax rates were lowered, and like every time tax rates are lowered, the first couple of years, tax revenues go down. So the minute we cut taxes, and then the first couple of years, the left screams, look, revenues are down 10% this year. Well, they clearly haven't paid attention to history when they look at Calvin Coolidge's tax cuts, John F. Kennedy's tax cuts, Reagan's tax cuts, Bush's tax cuts. Every time you cut taxes, revenues go down for a couple of years, sometimes 3 years, sometimes 4. But after that, the economy is not a quick mover. It's an oil tanker. It doesn't turn on a dime. But after a few years, revenue always grows and grows and grows. No one likes to mention, at least those on the left, that President Bush was the first president to see $1 trillion on income tax receipts. That was after he cut taxes on the supposed rich, which, when you look at the numbers, even according to the Congressional Budget Office, the Congressional Budget Office says the Bush tax cuts shifted the burden closer to the rich by a very small percentage, a few percent. It was largely a pretty flat tax cut across all brackets. It cut less in percentage for the rich and more in percentage for the poor. I think it was somewhere in the range of 3% for the rich and upwards of 4 or 5% and as much as 10% with deductions and stuff added into as well for the poor. But as time has moved on, that bottom half of income earners are paying less and less and less. As is to be expected, because they're going to vote with their wallets like everyone else does. And we rely more and more and more on that top 1%. The top 1% of income earners pay 40% of the income taxes in this country. The top 10% of income earners pays about 70% of the income taxes in this country. 1 in 10 people who are actually filing income tax returns are paying 70% of the income taxes. Is that not something that strikes you as fundamentally wrong? Maybe it's just me in my weirdness. To be in the top 10%, you don't have to make, you have to make a lot of money as far as Carroll County residents are concerned. The adjusted gross income is around $115,000 a year to be in that top 10%. I would imagine you'd probably earn closer to $150,000 before your deductions, interest deductions and things like that on your mortgage and child deductions, all that good stuff. History is absolutely clear. And even latest data on tax hikes, for example. In England, they raised taxes on the wealthy. Just recently, I think it was last year. Well, guess what happened? Revenues decreased, and so did economic activity. We saw this in the late 90s with Bill Clinton when he increased the capital gains tax. Revenues decreased, as did economic growth. Clinton saw tremendous growth in the 1990s, but the common person doesn't realize that economic growth could have been higher if we hadn't had the capital gains tax increase. Bill Clinton raised them And economic growth immediately went from 4.4 per quarter to 3.3% growth per quarter. Now, 3.3% is great growth, but it was 4.4% on average every quarter leading up to the increase in the capital gains tax. And when he increased the capital gains tax, it went down to 3.3%. A 33% reduction in economic growth just by increasing the capital gains tax and whatever tax code he changed at the same time. I think it was 98 when he passed those. But the evidence is absolutely clear. When you raise the capital gains tax rate, you get less revenue. When you lower it, you get more revenue. When you eliminate it, you lose the revenue, but you get tremendous economic growth. Even socialist countries in Europe don't tax capital gains because they know it's stupid. You discourage people from investing in the economy. What worse objective could you possibly have for your economic policy than creating a tax code that discourages investment? It's basic economics. You get less of what you tax and you get more of what you subsidize. We have a surplus amount of corn that we dump on foreign corn markets and impoverish farmers around the world because we subsidize corn and make the price artificially cheap. Therefore, we get bunches of corn. Far more than the world needs. We tax investment in the country. We get far less than the country needs. It's pretty simple, folks. Back after the break.
I'm coming home. I'm coming home. Tell the world I'm coming home. Let the rain wash away all the pain of yesterday. I know my kingdom awaits, and they've forgiven my mistakes. I'm coming home. I'm coming home.
Just a few minutes left in the program. And in wrapping up, I'd like to say I think it's awfully important to greatly consider the actions of the administration and what the alternatives are, because my primary interest in economics, the intriguing aspect of economics that is often untalked about, is the unseen. What is the opportunity cost of the behavior that we are involved in? And think about this in your daily life. When you decide to spend $10,000 on a jacuzzi when you don't have the money for it, what else could you have done with that $10,000? You probably could have put it towards the amortization on your mortgage, perhaps, or the principal. There's a lot of different things you can do with money. And it goes beyond money, too. It goes beyond policy as well. When we restrict the drilling of oil in the Gulf and Alaska and on federal land, as federal oil production is down 40%. As we don't sign legislation that would pass the construction of a Keystone pipeline, we miss out on things like 700,000 barrels of oil crossing into the U.S., as would happen with the Keystone XL pipeline. Now, keep in mind that the Keystone XL pipeline would be the 1,001st pipeline to run in that area. There are already hundreds of pipelines running over the aquifer that is the big concern of the left. And yet somehow this pipeline is going to be the big straw that shatters the spine of the camel. A $7 billion pipeline, all financed by the private sector, not by the government, would bring in 700,000 barrels. We're currently missing out. One of the reasons that gas prices are higher right now is because there's conflict in Africa. I believe Somalia, if I remember the article that I read in the New York Times yesterday. We're missing out on $400,000 of oil production on a yearly basis because of conflict in Africa. And yet, the Keystone Pipeline would make up for nearly double that reduction in oil input into our economy. This is what happens when you mix economics with politics, folks. You pay more at the pump because not enough union jobs were being used on the Keystone Pipeline. Because the left cannot come to grips with the fact that oil, coal, natural gas, nuclear power isn't going anywhere anytime soon. They cannot come to grips with the fundamental fact that this is how the country is and will be for the near future. You spend $3.60, $3.70 at the pump when you could be spending $2.50 or $2 at the pump. What else could you do with that money? What is the unseen of the economic policies of this administration? What else could you do with more disposable income? That is the ultimate question. The show available later today on my website, libertariats.wordpress.com. Please feel free to shoot me an email as well. I did clean out my inbox. libertariats@gmail.com. Adam Uglum here, signing off.
WLBB.